While the battle against Martin Rossi has ended, there can be no rest for Jazmine. In her dodgy motel room, Jazmine finds herself bedridden in a cold sweat, fighting off the onset of an intrusive nightmare. And yet, despite having survived an assassination attempt by a government she once served and trusted, this betrayal is not what troubles her so. Instead, a nightmare from her youth, once dormant, emerges once more, plaguing her not-so-restful mind. Growing up impoverished in a city like Chicago couldn't be easy for any child, much less a young woman of such striking beauty as Jazmine. Day after day, as Jazmine dodged the wayward stares of strangers, she was forced to flee in panicked horror from one particular looming gaze, a lurking presence that would follow her from school, through the alleys, and even stare at her from outside her window, in the security of her own home. This threat from her childhood confronts her once more in her dreams, provoking Limelight to take action. Against its own users' wishes, Limelight reaches for the thrashing Jazmine and rests a hand upon her. Jazmine flickers between a physical and incandescent state, all the while moaning and screaming in fear as her troubling nightmare evolves into hysterical terror. Alexa bursts into Jazmine's motel room from the outside, her presence negating the effect of Limelight, forcing Jazmine to retain physical form. The morning sunlight spills into the room, hitting Jazmine's eyes and waking her gently. Jazmine's first sight upon awakening is Alexa in the flesh, her wrinkled brow furrowed in concern for her newfound ally. A refreshing sight after spending the night with Private Eyes as a companion. There is no adequate surrogate for true human contact.
Alexa,
Jazmine mutters, every syllable spoken through gasps of breath. Alexa sighs in relief, knowing that Jazmine's distress isn't due to yet another threat on her life. She walks past the bed and wets a cloth in the sink with cold water, returning to place it on Jazmine's brow.
Gypsy Eyes takes roughly 72 hours to pass through the average person's system and detoxify. I believe your CIA calls it the 3 days grace. Essentially, you're still undergoing the effects of awakening to your stand. I'm sure everyone at Maison is in the same predicament.
Alexa reassures.
Don't worry. If everyone else is laid up, you still have your job there.
Jazmine's breathing slows, returning to a steady and comforting pace. Perhaps it was Alexa's presence that calmed her nerves, allowing Jazmine to open up even further to her former rival turned ally.
When I was a kid, I had a stalker.
Jazmine admits.
I guess I put it in the back of my mind when I left for university, but it terrified me. He was always there when I looked over my shoulder. When Gypsy Eyes hit, that memory was pulled out of me. Now it's become full-blown scopophobia. Gypsy Eyes works by stimulating the mind to create a vision so powerful it comes to life. Limelight is the result of that trauma. That's why it's always trying to turn you into light, even if there's no apparent threat.
Jazmine scoffs at the notion of her own stand becoming such an inconvenience to her, grabbing the wet towel on her forehead and squeezing some of the water out of it.
And the only way to keep it under control is by soaking me to the bone or have Private Eyes constantly stare me down. Think of it as me always keeping an eye out for you. That doesn't really help.
Jazmine admits with a wry smile. Alexa slides over to a table standing in the corner and takes a seat, making herself comfortable as she has quite the task before her.
I'll see you through these next 72 hours. Get some rest, Jazmine. At the end of it, it's back to Maison, and back to the hunt for the Square Biz Killer.
The hours count down, and after 3 days, Jazmine and Alexa are prepared to return to Maison Tower. Waiting for them is a tall, aged woman with gray hair and a slender figure, standing in an imposing posture to block their way. Though in her youth she may have been a headliner, by her appearance today she took the passing of time as a slap in the face. A bitter scowl greets Jazmine the moment she walks into Maison Tower.
I expected this out of the new girl, but not you, Alexa.
The woman scolds, staring down the more experienced model wearing her weariness on her face. Alexa had applied makeup to hide the bags under her eyes, or at least make an attempt. There seems to be no amount of foundation capable of hiding her fatigue.
You look like absolute trash. Fortunately for the rookie, trash seems to be her look. Excuse me? Dior Lancôme, editor-in-chief.
The woman retorts, asserting her position of power over the newly baptized model.
Get some fucking help, Alexa. And you, JoJo, was it? Upman wants to speak with you personally. Everyone's back to work after the disaster that was Friday night. Don't fuck this up any more than you already have. I'll take any opportunity to kick you out on the streets, you hear?
Without giving Jazmine enough time to interject, Dior turns her back on the two models and sachets away from them. Jazmine releases her breath, unaware that she was actively holding it in until just now.
She always like that? Always. Though she seems less fond of you for some reason. You don't look like trash, by the way. If I'm honest, you look especially cute today. Appreciate it, but that's not important right now. You take a load off. I've got an appointment to keep. I'll just be resting my eyes then.
Alexa heeds her friend's advice and collapses from exhaustion on a nearby bench. Jazmine, meanwhile, wastes no time and hits the elevator, pushing the topmost button that would inevitably take her to Upman's penthouse office. A single private eyes follows, trained on Jazmine to control her otherwise unmanageable standability. On the way to the top, Jazmine and Alexa converse through private eyes.
It just all dawns on me
Alexa concedes with a yawn, private eyes moving to meet Jazmine eye to eye.
that anyone at the party could have been awakened to a stand. As a general rule, only other stand users are capable of seeing stands.
If Upman has a stand, he'll be able to see private eyes then.
Bingo. You'll either need to keep private eyes hidden or Upman's eyes on you at all times. Not an easy feat, he's a multitasker.
I've got an idea.
Jazmine admits after a brief pause. The elevator arrives at Upman's penthouse. Jazmine steps into his office, instructing private eyes to fall back. In addition to leaving behind her ally, Jazmine perfectly wedges her shoe in the elevator door to keep it from closing, but leaving just enough of a crack for private eyes to look through. Mina Moore, Upman's secretary, notices Jazmine first. She brings their guest's arrival to her boss's attention, only for Upman to acknowledge Jazmine with a simple gesture waving her in, preoccupied with a telephone conversation. Sitting at his desk, he swivels his chair to face Jazmine, holds up a single finger, then spins himself back around to face the window.
Again, I'm so sorry about the party. Yes, trust me, I'll be taking legal action if we find the culprit. See you soon. Yes, goodbye.
Upman hands the receiver to Mina, who places the phone gently back on the hook. His body collapses into itself as he grumbles with an enormous sigh of frustration. Straightening back up, he fixes his tie and glances at Jazmine before delivering his qualms to no one in particular.
I swear if I find out who dropped that acid in the wine, they'll have a trip all right. Right out this window to the bottom of the fucking pavement.
He seemed to mean it.
You wanted to see me?
Yes, JoJo. Let's cut the crap, shall we? I know what you and Alexa are.
He states bluntly. Both Jazmine and Mina are startled by Upman's wild conjecture, accurate as it may be. The former agent tries to deny the accusation discreetly.
I don't know what you mean.
Upman scoffs, rolling his eyes.
Oh, please. Don't try and play innocent with me. It doesn't suit you. Fact of the matter is, when your agency came to Maison, I saw right through it. Whether you're CIA, FBI, I don't give a shit. Because what I saw was someone who was perfect for my magazine.
That's why you agreed to hire me?
Are you surprised? All I care about is results. I'll do whatever's good for the magazine. And you've yet to disappoint. But therein lies the problem. I hired you to be a model, not a detective. If I see anyone playing gumshoe in Maison, they're done for.
Jazmine knows she can't allow Upman to stifle her investigation. She appeals to his business sense, hoping to make some kind of argument to sway the president's decision.
But what about the killer? Aren't the murders also bad for your business?
Upman takes time to consider Jazmine's plea, snapping his fingers at Mina, who instinctively knows to retrieve a cigar in the nearby cabinet. As he gazes into the flame of his lighter while drawing a few puffs, Jazmine can see the gears turning in his head. Regardless, Upman remains obstinate.
I said what I said. Let the rest of your government goons do their job. You quit them and work for me. Whatever your salary was, I'll pay better. End of story.
Jazmine realizes there's no argument she can make to appeal to Upman's conscience. As far as she was concerned, the man lacked such a thing, only operating with numbers on his mind. Human life to Upman was yet another statistic to calculate. As it stands, the square biz killer has yet to slice into Maison's profit margin.
I understand.
Jazmine accepts, making her way back to the elevator. Upman, however, has one more instruction for Jazmine before she leaves.
Oh, and I'd like you to report to Theo's studio. He's our lead designer. Theo's going to want to take your measurements himself. His assistant hasn't shown up the past few days, and she has no excuse. Wasn't at the party.
Without a second thought, Upman turns around in his chair to make another phone call. Jazmine stands awkwardly in place, realizing she is unsure of where to go. The timid Mina takes notice and clarifies.
Floor 21.
She hesitates for a moment before speaking up again.
Also, you're missing a shoe.
So I am.
Back in the elevator, Jazmine retrieves her wedge and slips the shoe back on before hitting the proper button. On the way down, Jazmine expresses her concerns to Private Eyes.
His assistant is missing?
Suspicious indeed.
Alexa ponders.
We know for a fact that the square biz killer is somewhere in Maison. The party confirmed as much. He poisoned the wine to hide in plain sight among other stand users. It means we were close enough to scare him.
I don't know about Theo. The killer targets women, and Theo is how you would say, an on-fire homosexual?
Maybe we have the motive wrong. If the killer's motive is non-sexual, what about other models to knock out the competition?
That would also include Lancôme. She was a model in her youth. Could be acting out against women who stole her spotlight.
Jazmine begins a tally in her head, collecting her thoughts as she compartmentalizes her list of suspects while thinking out loud.
Our prime suspects are Upman himself, Weston and Duffy as photographers, Sunny, Eloise, and Lancôme as possible jealous models, and lastly there's Theo.
I obviously wouldn't throw any names out the window just yet, but what could Theodore's motives be?
That I haven't figured out yet.
After arriving on the 21st floor, Jazmine strides out of the elevator, glancing around the hallway to assure no one is present to view Private Eyes. The entire tower is shielded by glass, which comprises most of the outside structure. Internally, there are hallways that run along the diameter, with larger rooms on each corner of the building. All of the action appears to be away from the elevators, somewhere in the center of a T-shaped corridor running down the middle of the floor. With no one present, Jazmine opens a window, allowing Private Eyes to follow her from a safe vantage point on the outer perimeter of the building. Arriving at Theodore's studio, one of the larger corner rooms, she takes a deep breath before knocking to announce herself. Jazmine tries to turn the handle, but the door doesn't budge. She hears a rumbling commotion on the other side, followed by hurried steps and an unlatching of several locks. Then another set of frenzied footsteps.
"The door's open! Come on in!"
Shouts a pleasant voice from behind the door. Upon entering the studio, Jazmine is met with a disorganized array of fabric looms, patterns, and other such paraphernalia littering the space. Leaning against a large wooden crafting table in the center of the room is none other than Theodore himself, frantically working on his next masterpiece. Despite toiling in such chaos, Theo is dressed rather primly, wearing a golden madras patterned suit with exposed midriff and a lily-white cravat. He carries himself gracefully, like a feather floating on the wind.
"Stand right there.
He instructs Jazmine,
Just don't touch anything. Organized chaos."
keeping perfectly still. Jazmine tenses up, waiting for Theodore to begin taking her measurements. The shambolic fashion designer slides up to Jazmine with measuring tape and begins his work.
This is normally something I'd have Julia do, but she's a bit indisposed today.
Your assistant, right?
Precisely.
He confirms, physically spinning Jazmine around to double-check the width of her hips. Facing away from Theodore gives Jazmine a perfect vantage point to overlook the contents of his studio. In the corner lies a dresser chained shut, a chair placed immediately before it, and a set of crocheting needles on the floor. Spread out before her on the table lies stacks of muslins, each a component to forming a complete whole. Much like those patterns, pieces of the puzzle begin to align in Jazmine's mind. The last piece falls into place as Jazmine spies a spool of thread, labeled as belonging to Julia Roberta. As Jazmine slides her hand ever so slowly to touch it, she finds it's warm to the touch. Exactly as warm as human skin.
He's the one.
Jazmine proclaims to herself.
The square biz killer has a stand that takes perfectly cut portions out of his victim's flesh. He's turning them into a dress, a suit that he can wear to turn himself into a woman.
Jazmine frantically traces with her finger repeated motions upon the table, hoping that Private Eyes, who waits nearby, notices. Indeed, Jazmine's ally takes the hint.
What is she doing?
Alexa wonders. She switches through various filters for Private Eyes before discovering that Jazmine has been writing something with her own body heat, imprinting her message on the surface of the table. Both the spool and Jazmine's note glow brightly for Alexa. The note states plainly, B-I-N-G-O. This communication is interrupted when their suspect speaks up.
You know,
Theo states abruptly, slowly reaching for a pair of fabric shears.
I have a couple of pet peeves. When people chew with their mouth open and fidget with things out of the corner of my eye. But what I hate most,
He continues, grasping the blade in his hand with violent intent,
is when people look over my shoulder while I'm trying to work!
Theodore takes a powerful stab at Jazmine with his shears, but she steps back to narrowly avoid them. The scissors plunge into the wooden floor, embedding themselves there an inch or two. The intent to kill was clearly present. Bracing herself for more combat, Jazmine confronts her suspect.
So you can see Private Eyes.
She concludes.
That makes you a stand user. Now I'm pretty damn sure you're the bastard I've been looking for.
Stands, you say?
Theodore questions. He nonchalantly flips his ponytail, calling out to a phantom ally waiting in his corner. A geometric humanoid figure made of what looks like diamond comes into view before Theo, ready to strike.
I just call him Sharp-Dressed Man.
An attack launched by Theodore's stand catches Jazmine by surprise, who barely manages to escape the oncoming slash. A small nick on her shoulder reveals the nature of Theodore's power. Where her flesh was rent, the surrounding tissue begins to unravel, as if made of twine.
What the hell?
Isn't it such a suitable ability?
Theodore chuckles in pride.
Anything graced by Sharp-Dressed Man turns into fabric. Just one strike, just one loose thread.
Theodore takes the initiative and lets his stand wait behind, scattering the patterns on his desk about the room. Using the cloud of muslins as cover, Theodore slinks up next to Jazmine, close enough to grab hold of the loose thread in question.
And you'll be easy to unravel.
Theodore concludes his threat, pulling at the thread in a long arcing motion. To his surprise, however, Theo only finds a small length of string having emerged from Jazmine. He stares at it, unaware of Jazmine's reprise, an elbow to his solar plexus. Tripping over his own clutter, Theodore doubles back, hitting the floor near the entrance of his studio. As Jazmine approaches, Theodore calls out to his stand once more.
Sharp-Dressed Man!
The diamond-clad phantom dashes forward, passing its gleaming claws along the wooden floor as it closes in on Jazmine. Our model sidesteps the attack, but soon discovers that she was in fact not the target of Sharp-Dressed Man's onslaught. The ground underneath her splits perfectly in twain, as if it were a sheet of cloth bisected by a pair of scissors. The edges of the seam turn to fabric, losing all rigidity and causing Jazmine to slip through and fall down to the next floor. She crashes into a board taking place there, causing quite a commotion. Glancing up from where she fell, Jazmine notices Theodore looking down on her. After a simple tugging motion made by the tailor, the hole in the ceiling closes back up, sewn back together without a seam.
Don't mind me!
Jazmine exclaims to the confused crowd. She glances around to ensure Private Eyes can find her, but Jazmine's ally is nowhere to be seen.
Shit!
She curses to herself.
Without Private Eyes, I can't control when I transform.
With all eyes on Jazmine, she's in no danger of transforming into light by the power of her reflexive stand. But if she intends to confront Theodore once more, she simply can't rely on their gawking stares. She runs to the nearby water cooler and reaps the jug from its place, pouring the remaining water over her head to drench herself. Tossing the empty jug aside, she issues an apology to the office staff before sprinting to the hallway.
Sorry, go on with your meeting.
Jazmine finds her way to the stairs, fully intent on climbing them back to the level above and putting a stop to Theo. Upon entering the stairwell, she finds an out-of-breath Alexa waiting there for her, having run up 20 flights of stairs to catch up with her comrade.
I saw everything.
Alexa heaves as she collects her breath.
I always knew Theodore was a bit around the bend, but not a murderer. In the end, I have to trust my eyes. Let's stop this once and for all.
Marching to Theodore's office, Jazmine and Alexa prepare for their ultimate battle against the Square Biz killer. With both sets of private eyes ready, Alexa launches them ahead of herself, scanning the environment entirely. Mapping out all of Theodore's studio, the only thing they reveal is the same spool of human flesh and an intense, burning heat coming from the locked cabinet in the corner of the room.
He's not there.
Alexa states. The two investigators enter the studio, carefully walking by a cluttered mess of scraps, coats, and dresses spilled by Jazmine's previous encounter with Theo. As they head toward the dresser, one of the fur coats strewn about the floor silently rises behind them. Theodore emerges from within the mink, reforming from having rendered himself into fabric. Private Eyes was unable to notice this fact in time. Sharp-dressed man pierces both Alexa and Jazmine clean through their backs. Our two heroes drop to the floor like dirty laundry, their entire form converted into cloth.
But who?
Alexa mutters in a muffled attempt to scream. Theodore locks the door behind them, trapping the two would-be agents in his studio, completely defenseless and incapable of calling for help. He picks up the spool of Julia Roberta, and with a key in hand, begins unlatching the mysterious dresser.
I tucked myself into that fur coat. It seems like I did well enough to hide my body heat. That was the little trick you tried to pull earlier, wasn't it? Writing something with the warmth of your own hand?
Ripping open the dresser, Theodore reveals his intentions to Jazmine and Alexa. Within his cabinet is the shape of a woman, pinned upon a dress form like a gown. She remains incomplete, with frayed and tangled threads and unfinished seams. As Theodore returns to work, unraveling the knots and knitting Julia back together, he addresses his pursuers.
She was being a bad girl, so I punished her,
Theo explains.
After the party, I obtained this ability, pricked my finger on sharp-dressed man and witnessed my whole hand turn into a glove. Of course, it can also return things to their natural state. Quite the relief to discover, I must say.
Theo lifts his hand out to the side without looking up, and sharp-dressed man emerges to hand him a seam ripper. He continues.
But like any good artist with shiny new tools, I had to perform my own test. I entered my studio only to find that I wasn't the only one who broke in that day.
Resting in the closet near Julia's dress form is her satchel, which Theodore digs into. He removes a sketchbook from it, tossing it on the floor near Jazmine and Alexa. The book unfurls to reveal dozens of fetching designs, each one accompanied by a signature belonging to Theodore himself.
This wretched thing was stealing my designs. I had sharp-dressed man accost her. That's when I learned of a peculiarity with its ability. When transformed into fabric, the quality of a person is mirrored in the quality of the textile they produce.
A certain warmth of sincerity floods Theo's eyes as he glances back at the limp pile of Jazmine lying on the floor with an equally heartfelt smile.
When I pulled at your thread, JoJo, you didn't unravel. You're a good person, aren't you? Not one of her lackeys out to steal my glorious work.
The finishing touch is complete. Theodore removes Julia from the dress form and lays her on the table, ready for sharp-dressed man to return her to physical form.
I'm afraid the Lord didn't put as much effort into this one. Hopefully the extra attention to fix those nasty weaves and exposed seams improves her attitude somewhat.
Theodore Stan gently taps Julia's limp form with one of its claws, negating the effect of the initial transformation. She springs back to life, jumping upright as she sits on the edge of the table, confused by her presence in the studio. Theodore conjures up an excuse for her, a sly but oddly gentle smile.
Sleeping on the job, are we?
Oh, did I fall asleep? Mr. Carnaby, I'm so sorry.
Don't fret over it, Julia. You must be tired. Why not take the day off?
In a daze, Julia nods and begins to make her way out the door. After a few steps, Theodore calls out to her, giving Julia pause.
Oh, Julia, a moment. There's something on your back.
He reaches for a loose thread on the back of Julia's neck. Jazmine and Alexa watch from the floor in bated breath as the thread is pulled from Julia's body. However, with Theodore's intention being to reform Julia proven true, the patchwork assistant does not unravel. Indeed, a mere inch of stray thread emerges. Jazmine and Alexa are stunned. Theodore shoots a knowing smile at the golden-haired detective before sending Julia back on her way.
There you are, girl. Go on home.
Julia takes Theodore's advice and leaves the studio, completely unaware of the events that had transpired. Locking the door behind Julia, Theo lays Jazmine and Alexa out cleanly on the table before returning them to their original states. He then issues an apology.
I thought this whole time you were after my work as well. Turns out it was a case of mistaken identity, wasn't it?
Yeah, we thought you were the square biz killer.
Jazmine admits, cracking her neck in an attempt to straighten herself out after the experience of being turned into a tapestry. She flinches in pain as she realizes the slice on her shoulder remains intact. Theodore laughs.
I see. Should I be offended?
Theodore uses his stand to return the wound to a cloth-like material and takes a needle and thread to it. Sewing the gash shut and tapping it again with sharp-dressed man completely seals the laceration. Alexa responds wryly.
To be fair, you have quite the killer instinct.
True enough.
He rests awkwardly in one of the chairs at the crafting table, hugging one of his legs close to his chest with the other dangling to the floor, clearly deep in thought.
I knew every one of them.
He admits.
I fit every dress they ever wore, even the ones they died in. If you're after the square biz killer, you're bound to get hurt. I hope to God not. But if so, please come to me, and I'll stitch you right back up.
Jazmine passes her hand over the wound that was disappeared by Theodore's ability. There's not a seam or bump remaining, neither visible or to the touch. It's as though Jazmine was never hurt in the first place. She nods, and with a smile, agrees.
I look forward to working with you, Theo.
The sun sets for the night. Jazmine returns to her one place of rest, the Live Wire Motel. Hiding behind the adjacent building, one of Alexa's private eyes scopes out the surroundings to make sure no more La Cantina assassins are lurking about. After an extensively thorough survey, Private Eyes returns to give Jazmine the all-clear. Jazmine emerges from her hiding place, making her way past the reception desk.
Hey, hot stuff!
Shouts the clerk.
I've got a message for you. Someone called for you.
Groaning at the catcall, Jazmine nevertheless follows his voice. Who could have left her a message? Jazmine takes caution when retrieving the piece of paper with the note in question. Upon reading it, Jazmine nearly destroys the parchment as her hands clench around the paper. Scribbled haphazardly, the message reads,
Meet me at Tom's Diner at 10 o'clock tonight. Calvin.